Good afternoon, Dr. Kinsella. This is Chris Soto-Lopez, and I am presenting my Module 4 Capstone course for ITM 590. And this is my project. I'd like to start with the introduction. And the introduction is basically an intro to networking. And IT networks are basically the cardiovascular system of any enterprise, any organization. Um, they're responsible for the flow of information throughout the network, into the network, and outside of the network. And so for me, KPMG does about 90% of of its work, of its critical business on the network itself. And so part of that, the team that manages that critical infrastructure is the network services team. And they monitor and maintain and operate the network in general. And one of the things that we're going to discuss is basically that network services team. Um, what we're going to take a look at is how the network services team functions and the breakdown of the network services team based on general systems theory, um, outline some of the challenges that we face, and look at some of the opportunities um, and the changes that I would personally implement as a C-level or senior leader. So to take a look at the network services organization, you have to take into account five key functions that we operate under. And those functions are fault management, configuration management, performance management, security management, and accounting management. Now, each one has its own obvious set of identifiers, right? For fault management, we take a look at de detecting issues found in software, found in hardware, issues with users, physical connectivity issues, logical connectivity issues that may be encountered in routing, and other aspects as well. We also establish um, processes for identifying, reporting, and resolving these issues as well. From a configuration management standpoint, we basically control all aspects of system configuration, including network systems and network support systems. So network systems being routers, switches, access points, etc., and network support systems being the servers that perform monitoring or performance management and timing, etc. Now we inventory all the systems and ensure that standardization of hardware and software and configurations are put in place. So we don't want to deviate from a certain hardware list or a certain hardware vendor. We don't want to deviate from the level of software that we have throughout the enterprise, and we want to sustain the same level of configuration throughout. From a performance management perspective, we monitor and measure key aspects of system performance. System memory, CPU cycles, throughput, latency, jitter, etc. We ensure that the overall performance meets or exceed our service level agreements that we have in place with our customers and partners. And with that, we also ensure that proper alerting is being performed on all systems and the procedures are in place to validate and look at those alerts. From a security management perspective, we provide security on permitting access to authorized individuals to systems that we have and the support systems that we operate. We also establish security standards and we implement those security standards throughout the enterprise, the network enterprise. Accounting management, we deal with obviously inventory management, but we also look at the usage of the systems that we have, right? The burn rate, in other words, the failure rate, the mean time before failure, we take a look at, and we also do trend analysis on some of the issues that we may have. And a perfect example of this is if you had a ticket on a particular system that you consistently kept having, it could lead to an identification of a software bug or a hardware failure or hardware um, problem that we may have, and we may need to replace it earlier than waiting for the system to fail. So as we move on, there are other key issues that we kind of take a look at within the network services organization. Because the the um, the responsibility is so big, we have broken up the network services into three distinct organizations or sub-organizations. And those three organizations are the remote office group, the data center, and the security group. The remote offices focuses on local office networks and campus networks that we currently operate, and we manage roughly about 110 offices nationwide that encompasses what the remote office's responsibility is. We primarily use one vendor, and that vendor is Cisco, and we typically use purpose-built hardware for those specific areas, and those include Catalyst switches, ASR and ISR routers, Cisco wireless controllers and access points. But within the data center, what we do is we tend to focus on connectivity to servers, storage, and applications um, t- uh, to and from our data centers and our cloud providers. And in that case, we have a different set of hardware that we look at, and that's purpose built for the data center, which is the Nexus data center switches and VMware network virtualization software, which is purpose built for having high bandwidth, low latency type of connections. From a security standpoint, we focus on providing firewalls and virtual private networks throughout our infrastructure. And typically, what they take a look at is ensuring that the security on applications are established within the firewalls, and that the right users are using the VPN and monitoring their usage on our corporate network. And we primarily use Palo Alto and Cisco ASA firewalls to do the job in that area. Now, the GST perspective, right? The basic premise, obviously, of GST is to accommodate interrelationships and overlap between separate disciplines. From a network services perspective, we're just an amalgamation of multiple disciplines and teams. And within the GST, they're interrelated elements. So a system is just a set of interrelated elements. From the network services perspective, all the different teams are those interrelated elements, right? In my organization, these also can include different hardware platforms, different processes, users, etc. An adaptive system within GST is just a system that can change itself in response to the environment. And the key here is that it can improve through continued interactions with its surroundings. In other words, back to the network services perspective, our team is always in constant change. It's in constant change of processes, technologies, um, people, management, and as those changes come about, we have to change in response to that, but we have to change in a way that improves our ability to provide services to the business, and that's what we typically do. Now, you can't talk about GST without talking about IT governance within that framework. So obviously, IT governance is just a framework that aligns IT strategy to business strategy. Um, and if that IT strategy is followed properly, then you're going to have measurable and successful results. And all it does, it provides a structure, some standards, and best practices so that the team can adhere to them. Um, it's mostly developed by senior leaders and C-level executives. It doesn't have to be. It could be managers can also instill that, but typically it's done within the senior leadership. And at KPMG, we also adhere to that, and our senior leaders do provide IT governance for the rest of our infrastructure. Um, from a network services perspective, network system governance provides that framework for us and how to operate. And then what GST provides is the clarity to more effectively structure that governance piece and provide an understanding of the patterns that we have and the relationships we have within our organization and outside of the organization. So For us, using GST to understand the organization, it helps us to establish the right IT governance model for our organization. So just because we have these types of IT governance models, and just because we're able to kind of look at our organization from a GST perspective, doesn't preclude us the fact that we have challenges, right? Like any organization, we have major challenges that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and on a long-term basis. And for me, when I look at encompass all the challenges that we have within network services, there are three main categorizations that I put these problems in. And those categorizations are technical, social, and managerial. From a technical perspective, our biggest challenges are legacy systems, poor performance, high demand from the business, and vulnerabilities that are found across the board. Now, these vulnerabilities obviously come from our legacy systems, and legacy systems do provide poor performance. So they're all kind of interrelate with each other, right? High demand doesn't allow for these legacy systems to perform at optimum level because we're demanding more of our systems. From a social perspective, we're looking at budgets, and keep in mind that our budgets are too small to keep up with the demand that we're being levied on, and the overwhelming amount of information that we receive is also troublesome because it's hard to look at all of the information that we receive, all the faults, all the events that we receive with the amount of people that we have. If we were constantly taking a look at our events, we would never get anything done. We would never get all our projects done. So that's obviously a social issue to overwhelm our folks within the network services group. So with that said, though, however, that that overwhelming feeling also attributes to the lack of training and the lack of retention within our people. So because we're so focused on fighting fires, we can't get our guys trained, right? We can't retain our guys because they keep leaving because of the amount of stress that we put on them. So that's also a social issue that we have to combat. From a managerial perspective, we do suffer from a lack of governance. We have governance in place, but it's not enough, and we lack baselines and guidance on standards. And also, we don't have the vision from our senior leaders as to where we're going to go, right? Where where does the business want to go, and how do IT operate within that should those strategic objectives? And I think that's part of the issue that we're missing, and that's part of the challenge. Now, I think that some of the ways that we can combat some of the challenges that we have is by looking at some of the opportunities that may be available to us, and then making some changes, appropriate changes to them. So I'm going to address some of the opportunities that I think we have within the network services group, and take a look at some of the changes that I would personally implement. So I think there are six areas of opportunity that we can look at. We can look at controlling costs, operating costs, um, being more proactive in our network management capabilities, enhancing our network security, providing high availability to our most critical systems, improving quality of service throughout our network enterprise, and looking at performance maximization. Now, I just lump all these areas within one because the solution is pretty evident for us, which is to provide managed services to help us establish these capabilities and opportunities throughout our network. By having managed services, we're going to be able to control our costs because those costs would be essentially fixed, because we're going to be providing that from a vendor. They would be able to have the expertise to proactively look at our network, secure it effectively, and enhance our network by providing us suggestions on things that we can enable. provide high availability by identifying areas where we should have high availability in, where there are high levels of traffic, where critical systems are established, where a lot of our customers are based out of, and then using our managed service provider to add those capabilities into it, high availability capabilities into those sites and areas. Improving our QoS capacity. By looking at QoS, we can limit the number of high bandwidth connections that we have. Looking at it smartly and integrating monitoring within that can improve the latency within our network, can improve video performance. And by identifying um, types of traffic such as streaming traffic as videos like such as Spotify or YouTube, um, and separating that from our core systems such as telephony or streaming services that are provided within our company, that can allow us to more effectively allow our business objectives to move clearly through it and not allow um, some of the non-working aspects of our business to get in or get a lot of time on the network. From a performance maximization perspective, we may not have the expertise to use all the features necessary within the network systems that we have. So having a service provider that is more conscious about the capabilities that are in our equipment can help us maximize the performance of our network without adding additional cost. And so that's some of the things that we would want to take a look at, the opportunities that we may have to enable the business to thrive on the network. So tackling the challenges um, that we have in providing solution, well, just like in the challenges that I stated before, there are three main ones: technical, managerial, and social. So with that, I want to kind of take a look at some of the issues that we have, and then just focus on some of the solutions that I think are most relevant and most important to kind of identify. And they may differ from the challenges that I've already established, but I think that in the long run, they would help those. So obviously, from a technical perspective, the issues that we have are basically we have complex, disjointed, and difficult to manage networks. Um, so the solution that I think that would help alleviate these types of problems is the unification and simplification of our networks. If we take a look at the architecture and look at ways to simplify it, then it's going to be a lot easy to manage those types of networks. Focus on monetization and the functionality improvements within the network, looking at ways to take out the legacy systems and enable additional functions within the newer systems that we put in will help also um, lower the complexity, unify our networks, and make it easier to manage. Understanding the current layout is critical. I think sometimes we don't really understand what's out there on the network, you know, and that's something that we have to tackle in order to improve our network capabilities. Setting up advanced monitoring and alerting is also part of that understanding the overall network aspect, the overall network integration piece, and then forecasting based off of that the technology upgrades that we need. So if we know we have systems that are going to come up end of life, end of support, then we want to be able to identify those and manage them appropriately, and then forecast when we will be able to budget to remove them and move around systems that we need to. From a managerial perspective, I think one of the biggest issues, and I think it happens across the board in many other organizations, is this dogmatic view of network management and this focus on outdated ideas. This issue that we have of constantly being in firefighting mode, um, and having projects that are unsustainable and that are siloed off from other teams, which they shouldn't be. So from my perspective, I think that blending and combining functions um, would improve uh, would improve the transparency of the projects that we have. Concentrating on a holistic solution and focusing on the big picture would also help massively get out of the siloed effects and get out of the unsustainable projects by contributing, having contributions from the network services team as a whole helps, not just security or not just remote office or not just data center. Looking at the whole picture would help. And then the cross utilization of people, right? I think because we have these silos, these teams, they don't tend to appreciate what the responsibilities of what the other has. And that's for instance, the security team is so siloed off, they don't take a look at what it takes to have a system come and become operational from the data center team. And by having too restrictive security, uh, may not allow for the operations team to perform at its peak. So having those two teams understand each other will go a long way to managing our networks and being more robust network and more transparent network. And then lastly is the social aspect. Now, I'm looking at from the social aspect, I really want to just focus on the security piece because I think that's the biggest issue within the network services group. Um, and that is that I think senior managers don't acknowledge security issues and concerns openly, and the security has always been a practice that is always a silo, and it's not open to providing information or sharing information or insight. And also, it really tends not to care about what the operational network needs or is looking to do, and it doesn't take those requirements into consideration when applying security. So the way I would tackle that from a social perspective is the unification of both teams, right? They both, the security and operations have to talk to each other, and what better way to do that than combining those teams together so that they understand what each other has to go through. Um, Providing clear guidelines and policies to address these silos is also very important. Forcing the security team to look at operational requirements and having guidelines as to how they would take a look at those requirements is essential, and vice versa. Having the operational team take into account security considerations and security concerns goes a long way in establishing streamlined processes for projects. That way, security doesn't always have to be involved. They can take a look at it and at a glance and understand these security um, practices are being placed within the operations. And that goes back to having security and operations work together hand in hand on projects. So in conclusion, I just want to kind of recap everything that we just discussed. Um, The network is obviously an essential part of any business. It is a key component of business success. And for KPMG, 90% of our core businesses relies on that network. And the network services team is there to ensure that we have a nearly 100% uptime rate and operational throughout, and that the services that we provide are top notch and high speed. And as we discussed before, we've broken down the network services team through the through GST, and it has aided us in identifying the commonalities and the overlaps and the challenges that we have. And it also helped to address how we would combine those types of solutions to the network services group. We also looked at the challenges that we face that are not unique to any to just KPMG or the network services team, but there are prolific across all all services, and these issues can be found in any network services team that you find in other companies. So understanding the challenges that we have and identifying solutions, I think are key to having good leadership and is instrumental in aligning what we do in network services to the overall business strategy. They go pretty much hand in hand. And without them, I think that we find ourselves in a place where we don't perform at our best. And that pretty much concludes my project in general and the network services team as a whole. And I hope that the information I provided is informative and helps to bring light to the paper that I've written. I thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.